y'all ready? Okay.
You are listening to America's home for stadium news and information.
Stadiums USA Radio on Yahoo Sports Radio and yahoosportsradio.com.
Once again, with your ticket to the action,
here's Bill Hazen.
There's a saying about a great writer that goes like this. If you have a really good writer, he is a guy who is a so-called must-read. And the guy you're about to meet is a guy who certainly has been a must-read for many years. I followed him with a great love of pro basketball. Bob Ryan is a guy you just had to read to keep up with the game. He always brought a great view of the game and of the people who were involved in the game, and it's our pleasure to visit with him now. Bob's had a great, great career. He's still at it and involved with a lot of media stuff. AP National Sports Writer of the Year in 2000. Bob, great to visit.
Very nice of you to say that, Bill. Thank you.
I wanted to talk about some of the great stories about NBA arenas. And, of course, where else do you have to go than Boston Garden? That has to be the greatest place to start. Take us inside that place and introduce it to us.
The Garden, funny thing about it, as a basketball venue, had far more cachet outside of Boston, perhaps, than in it, because at home, the Garden is associated more with hockey. It was built for it, and it was one of the site of an original NHL team. But at large, after the Celtics got through winning those 11 championships in the Russell era, of course, it became synonymous with basketball for the rest of the world. I, as a basketball guy, cherish those memories for its basketball circumstance. Of course, it had great sight lines for fans. It was modeled, literally modeled as a replica of the Madison Square Garden in New York that existed from 1924 until 1968, the famous one at 50th Street between 8th and 9th Avenue. It seated 13,000, whereas the Garden, the original, was 18, but it was a replica. And so it meant that the sidelines were great. Fans had great proximity to the floor. There was just something special about it. And, of course, when you attach 11 championships with the Russell era, throw in 5 more before they moved to the present building, it obviously became one of the most famous basketball arenas in the world as well.
I always remember the first time that I went in there, and I remember Jeff Twiss, who was in the front office of the team at the time, and he kind of took me in, and they really knew how to roll out the red carpet there, Bob. They played it to the hilt. I'll never forget the first TV game I did out of there. He said, Bill, come on over. We just happened to have the network television seat available for you, and Bobby Leonard and I, boy, we thought they were really rolling out the carpet. Of course, it was dead center court. You know right where that was. It was a great seat to watch a game.
Yeah, it was. Well, we had great seats, too, then. The media press did, and it enhanced your ability to cover the game. Those seats, of course, do not exist hardly any longer in the league because the new owners have given it all over to the high-lows and clients who can overspend for the seats. But those days are gone. I don't really going to start complaining about that. I'm just stating a simple fact. Thanks to that proximity, I was able to really get a job done better, frankly.
There's a great story regarding the floor. Of course, we know it was a parquet floor and was unique to professional basketball at that particular period of time. But if you talk to enough players around the league, they'd tell you that some of the boards were a little warped or a little loose, and that the Celtics had an advantage because their players practiced on it and knew exactly where those boards were. How much of that, Bob, was actual truth, and how much of it was just legend that got built up over the years?
No more than 10% truth. And then to tell you the truth, there are Celtic players who would tell you that there were other arenas at the old days that also had equally funky floors. But the Celtics did nothing to dispel the myth, naturally, because it's like having a spitball image. If they think you have one, then you have one. And therefore, they loved it when people would think that this was all true. I think there might have been one spot perhaps at some point, but, no. But the fact about the floor, though, is that the floor was, in fact, the result of scrap lumber that was built. And that's why it was built in that design way, the parquet fashion, but it was strictly a practical matter of economics of the time and in post-World War II. And the proximity of the wood, and that's why the floor was built that way. And that floor lasted for a long time. They didn't change it until well into the 80s.
Bob, you traveled around the league, obviously, extensively in those days. Tell us which arenas impressed you back then.
Oh, my favorite visiting arena of the 70s when I started by far was Chicago Stadium. I loved everything about it. First of all, it was WPA project in the 30s. We knew that. Had wonderful acoustics, had that wonderful heater organ, which in those days they played at the Bulls games and not just the Blackhawks games. In later years, they stopped using it during the Bulls games. And only used it during the Blackhawks games, which was a big loss to the NBA. But it had the famous locker rooms where downstairs you ascended a staircase to get to floor level. That was different. The acoustics there I thought were fantastic. Its own history was superb. Love Chicago Stadium. Another funky arena that was so crazy that was lovable was Cobo Hall in Detroit. Just figuring out your way around was your first rule when you became a new reporter, just to try to find your way to the court. That was a challenge. That a stage at one end. I love that place. That was a fun place. Those two stand out the most from my earlier. When the Hawks came into being, they played at Georgia Tech at Alexander Coliseum, which was only seated about 7,500, was a college venue. That had great fan proximity, of course. Another one that sticks out for me a little bit because of the size and intimacy and the nature of the crowd was Portland. When Portland came into the league, playing at the Memorial Coliseum, which had been the site of the 1965 NCAA Final Four, where Bill Bradley got 58 in the consolation game. But I remember that crowd was great. You could say no wrong about the Portland Trailblazers. I said it was more like they should have on their jerseys PHS, Portland High School. That's the way that people love that team. And I said that when I remember writing a line once about them, they booed every call. Going to Portland was like facing 12,000 kids locked up inside an apartment on a rainy day. and I used to love to go to Portland. So there's a few.
Yeah, that place really rock and roll. I remember that. You were in for a long night, brother, when you went in there. If you got a road win at Portland, you were really doing something.
But, the funny thing about it, Bill, is Bird, it was still, before they got the Rose Garden, I mean, he played in that one, and he loved it. And the lighting was kind of odd. It was kind of subdued. It was different. But he had some of his absolute greatest road games ever in that place, including the game when he had 47, which included about 8 left-hand baskets one night, beat them. And he just thought that place, he just could shoot. He thought the background was perfect, the rims he loved. He loved it. I mean, I'm telling you, if Larry Bird spent his career in Portland, he would average 30 points a game career. I mean, because he just loved playing in that place.
In the late 1980s, stadium design started to change, and I personally associate that with the Palace in Auburn Hills. And I remember walking in there and seeing it for the first time and thinking to myself, it's over, it's changed. Everything is going to be different from this point on. What were your impressions when you first walked into that building?
Here are two pieces of fact, not opinion. The baseball stadium that changed all baseball stadium construction for all time was Camden Yards. That's A. B. The building, as you have so accurately stated, that changed all construction of indoor arenas forever and ever was the Palace of Auburn Hills. The first one that had that number of luxury boxes by cleverly designing it so that there were luxury boxes, halfway up as well as all the way around. It became the template, the blueprint for every subsequent arena that's been built. And you're so right. We were taken on a tour of the unfinished building by, his name was Andy. I can't remember his last name. A very nice fellow from the front office there. And I was, introduced to this concept of how to get these luxury boxes in, especially at the lower level, which was a tremendous proximity view. I knew right away that this was the wave of the future. So, my first impression was, oh, my God, this is fantastic. That's my first impression. Now, where it's located, 45 miles from the airport, that's a whole other matter, but that's a matter of their, I'm never crazy about the location.
You may remember that the same year that building came online, so did the Charlotte Coliseum, which was also larger. I mean, that was a gorgeous building, and of course, Charlotte was a new franchise at the time. That came online the very same year, but they didn't have hardly any skyboxes, and the ones they did have, I think they only had 4 or 5, and they were suspended from the roof. And of course, that stadium is long since a memory, so they guessed wrong in Charlotte, I guess.
They guessed wrong. They built the old style, and that's that. And Miami built the old style, Miami Arena, that's gone. Yes, they got it wrong. Just like the Albatross ballpark in baseball that missed Camden Yards by a year because they did it the old way is the new Comiskey, which is a terrible place with terrible sightlines, too high, awful place, a dumb ballpark for the future, but they misread the future completely, as did Charlotte. And they rectified that. They never knew one. So there you go, as we well know.
Bob, it's great to visit with you. I'm glad to see that for many radio and television folks still have an opportunity to check you out regularly. It's fantastic that you're active and enjoying the years, the very fruitful years of an awful lot of great writing, and continued success to you. And I hope we can invite you back for another visit.
I'd love to come back. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Bob. Bob Ryan, our guest.